Hello everyone, the launch of Artemis 2 is imminent. It is currently scheduled for April 1st, and it will be the first crewed mission to the moon in over 50 years. So the first time any country has tried to send people over to the moon in that time. It will go into Lunar SOI. It will not make orbit around the moon. It is a lunar flyby mission, so it's not making orbit or landing. And the reason for that mission profile is tied up with the design of the Space Launch System, SLS. And the core reason is that SLS never received its designed for upper stage, which is the Exploration Upper Stage, or EUS. That upper stage would certainly be able to allow Orion to capture around the moon and then return properly. It would be a loose capture into a high orbit on one end, but it would be able to get low on the opposite end, and then it would be able to return. But the upper stage that is currently slated for SLS that will launch on Artemis 2 is the ICPS, the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion. I forget what the P is. It's propulsion stage? Anyway, ICPS, it is a smaller upper stage derived from the Delta IV upper stage, and so it was sort of legacy hardware while they got the EUS ready, and they haven't gotten the EUS ready. So now NASA's looking to have the Centaur 5 upper stage from Vulcan to replace the ICPS going forward, and that will be somewhat more effective, but it's not going to give the Space Launch System its full possible capacity. It's not the design for upper stage. So anyway, in honor of the Artemis 2 launch, I decided to do what I always do to SLS, which is ruin it. I mean, no, really, most of my ideas have been okay. This one is horrible, which is why I haven't done it before, because I knew it was horrible. But it's funny, so it's okay. And what I'm doing here is I have decided, because, you know, all the SpaceX fans hate on SLS, I decided to try to make it more into a rocket of their liking. I've turned it into a Falcon 9. It's got 9 RS-25s at the bottom now. There you go, SpaceX fans. It's got 9 of the RS-25s and a vacuum RS-25 on the second stage. The tank is still the same. It's still the normal SLS core stage. It is from Artemis construction kit. And even though it doesn't look like it has a vacuum nozzle, it's got that configuration with a 150 area ratio and a 461 second ISP and 3 ignitions. So it is a proper RS-25 right there. And so this is a Falcon 9 version of SLS. So presumably this meets with SpaceX fans' approval. Of course, we would have to put landing legs and grid fins and everything, and then it would have to have an RS-25 that could reignite so that it could land somewhere. But then we'd be all ready to go, right? This is the perfect setup. Well, I mean, obviously there is a flaw in this, which is also a flaw in Falcon 9 and in Starship Super Heavy, in that it's not really designed to go to the moon at all. It's only 2 stages. Oh, by the way, the upper stage I decided to just string together these EUS hydrogen tanks with struts, and I think I've sort of clipped this too much into the fairing there. I'm gonna scooch it, even though there's a gap there. I think it's safer if I scooch it out. We are therefore only going to carry the low Earth orbit payload, which currently I've got 85 tons. I think I'm gonna knock that down to 80 because of the low thrust weight ratio. 9,200, sometimes Ascent Guidance can manage that, but I don't think that's gonna be doable here. We'll see. No, 80. And then we will adjust based on the result. So 80 tons is what I'm aiming to carry, which is a lot, but this is in non-reusable mode. And when you think about it, this is very much like New Glenn, so Blue Origin's New Glenn. The upper stage is virtually identical, really. The thrust is a little bit more with the compared to the 2 BE3Us that New Glenn has. but it's a hydrolox stage. And then if they upgrade to the 4 BEU version, then that will actually beat the thrust here. This would just have a little bit more efficiency. And down here, of course, New Glenn has a Methalox stage, so this is just a pure hydrolox version of New Glenn. And its mass is about the same. And so in the end, getting 80 tons to orbit would be very good. And once we get the recoverability stuff on and try to reserve fuel for recoverability, we could expect better than New Glenn's 45 tons, assuming we had engines that work. I mean, this is a horrible idea mainly because the RS-25s are really expensive. If you had Raptor-like hydrolox engines that were really cheap, you could probably just dunk them into the ocean and not even mind so much. I mean, as SpaceX has been doing with all those tests. So, yeah, it could be good. At least like this it could be. But what about to the moon? Well, first let's launch this. Let's see about that 80 tons. And then we'll talk about why SLS is the way it is, and why this is maybe not so good for the moon. Why even New Glenn is not particularly good for the moon right now. And we need to design our rockets properly. This is not an exercise in saying this is a good idea. It's not. This is instructive in terms of teaching us about rocket design. That's all it is. Okay, here we go. I've got some numbers in there. I have tried to launch before. I haven't made orbit with it. It's been a little bit fraught here. So I'm gonna get the start a little bit. I'm trying to tweak these numbers to be a little bit better, but we'll see. I really wish it could figure that out on its own, but apparently not. So here we go. Oh, just a note, I did add a skirt here, and that weighs 8 tons. It's a structural part, procedural. That's in addition to the engine adapter. So we've got extra mass down there that isn't pleasant. So that's weighing us down as well, but alright, here we go. Throttle up, ignition. And off it goes. Well, I don't know, that's not looking good. Sometimes it changes though to 400, so who knows. Well, we're through max Q. Results still indecisive. Okay, staging. Well, while thrust is low, let me try to release the fairings. Off they go. We seem to be about 300 short. We'll see if that holds. We actually have no roll control. On the one hand, this is a fairly powerful engine. On the other hand, we're actually using it to try to make low Earth orbit, which is not what the original rocket is designed for. When you think about it, yes, of course, this is much more powerful than the EUS, but the EUS isn't supposed to be using the entire stage to make low Earth orbit. It's supposed to be transferring over to the moon, in which case it has a luxurious amount of time to do it. It only uses a little portion of its delta V to make orbit. The core stage does most of that. And the reason the core stage is able to do most of that is because the upper stage is lighter. And it also got the boost from the boosters. Alright, we're in the concluding portion of this business, and it looks like we'll be short by 265-ish. And that's assuming we don't have any margin. Alright, so let's go back to the VAB and see what we need to do to the rocket, what kind of payload we can actually carry. So let's say we need 300 more. So back to the normal, well, really it's actually 9,600 now that we are trying to pack here. So we need 9,646 at least. NASA's probably not going to be happy with that. And our result is that basically 70 tons, 69 tons. Yeah, I know. So it's still good. I mean, when you think about it, it is still nearly 5% of the launch mass, which is very good for a rocket. But it is what it is. And then once we put the reusability, it's going to cut that down, probably back down to New Glenn levels. So it's maybe, if regular New Glenn could actually get 45 tons to low Earth orbit, it would be useless to use this. But I suspect that maybe what this is telling us is that normal New Glenn has a bit of problem with that, as we might have seen. And actually, they need the 9x4 to really make that more decisive. But anyway, we look forward to the New Glenn 9x4 version. And, well, that's good and all, but SLS isn't really made for low Earth orbit anyway. Let's take a look at the potential lunar version of this whole business. So what happens when we just slap some SRBs on? Now, our upper stage is not well proportioned for the lunar transfer, right? And what you see here is we've still got the 9 engines at the bottom. And with the boosters, we've got a 1.32 thrust-to-weight ratio, which seems rather horrible, all things considered. But we're aiming to have enough delta V to transfer to the moon, right? And so that's 12,500 is what we really want. Right now it says 12,432, but we're hoping that it shapes up all right. But our payload is only 16 tons. So we have a problem. So how is this possible? How is it possible that the regular SLS gets 37 tons and this only gets 20? Well, first of all, we have 9 engines at the bottom. So that's pretty useless. We're just carrying extra mass that we don't need. Does it help at all? Doesn't seem to. All it does is help push a heavier upper stage, but the upper stage is now way above the delta V that it needs to be, because what we would like, the optimal delta V, is a delta V equal to the exhaust velocity, or roughly 10 times the specific impulse. So we're looking for a delta V here of 4,600, but in order to actually push any payload to the moon, we need a lot more than that. So we're asking the upper stage to do 6,400 here. It's an inefficient upper stage. It's carrying a larger engine than we would like. It's heavier. And of course there's minor inefficiencies because of the way I've done the tanks. But all this ends up being that it's still very much sort of like New Glenn, because it also has a sort of inefficient upper stage as far as I can tell. But we have this 20-ton payload capacity that isn't even worth it. So what would you do, right? Well, what would you do is you would redo this whole business. So here what I've done is I've removed 2 of the 4 tanks that we had. One of them was only partly filled, by the way, so keep that in mind. And what we end up with is still most of the delta V. In fact, now we're getting more delta V than we were before overall, right? There's still the 20-ton payload, but now we're getting 12,741. Well, that's because the core stage is no longer grossly overburdened. So the whole notion of you need a really heavy upper stage on here, because people are so used to think about low Earth orbit capabilities, right? They keep thinking, well, we want to maximize our payload to low Earth orbit. But if you're really aiming for somewhere else, then having a heavy stage here isn't good anymore. You need the heavy stage to get to low Earth orbit if you've got a 2-stage rocket or something like that. But that stage is no longer any good for getting you over to the moon. So that's why Falcon 9 is not good at making interplanetary transfers. That's why New Glenn is not good at making interplanetary transfers. And that's why Starship is not good at making interplanetary transfers. They're all low Earth orbit optimized at the moment. They need another stage in order to make them capable of going to the moon or Mars or wherever, and none of them has a dedicated third stage for that, which is interesting when you think about it. They're all getting by with their two-stage rocket and trying to avoid that, but there's really no avoiding the fact that you need it. Now, it's amazing the lengths people go to avoid having a third stage. Here, of course, we're taking advantage of boosters. Anything to avoid having just a three-stage rocket like Saturn V. But you can suddenly see that Saturn V was a good idea. But let's just go back to like an EUS situation. So I'm using the Sobel version of EUS to have the tanks like this. Okay, so now we have 5,200 here just with the normal EUS. So it compares pretty well with the previous setup. So why of course are we not getting the optimal the amount that SLS Block 1B would get? Because we're carrying a super heavy engine on the upper stage and we're carrying 9 engines at the bottom. So we don't need the 9 engines at the bottom because we're not carrying a heavy low Earth orbit optimized stage. Going from the 9 engines to the 4 engines, oh, we've still got this thing, right? So let's just go back to SLS regular. Still, I've got a suspicious initial thrust-to-weight ratio from this, and I'm puzzled by that. But okay, let's hold off on that for now. We've got a lot more delta V now, as you can see. We still got the RS-25 on the top here. And here, if we're aiming for 12,500, we can get 38 tons, still with the RS-25. So if we replace it with lighter engines, we should do better. And then we get back to having EUS and the regular SLS stack. So if you just had 2 stages and omitted the boosters, you could get a healthy payload to orbit, 70 tons. You know, that's pretty good for a 2-stage rocket with the hydrolocks and with that liftoff mass of about 1,400 tons. But that rocket would be crap at sending things to the moon. Basically, it would have 20 tons with the boosters without any new upper stage. But then do you really want yet another upper stage on top? Not really. So this all demonstrates the value of having a stage that's dedicated to going to the moon mostly. It does complete orbit, but it's dedicated to going to the moon. And even if you have you can have a big engine, you can have a small engine, it's fine. As long as the stage is dedicated to going to the moon instead of trying to be a low Earth orbit stage, it's a huge benefit. It basically doubles your payload capacity to the moon if you've got a stage that's actually meant for it, compared to a second stage that's just meant to go to low Earth orbit. And so that's what the SLS-9 shows us, and why it's not a good idea as a conversion for SLS. But we have this resistance to making an extra stage. At least Blue Origin has the Blue Moon, and the Blue Moon can act like a transfer stage and basically is like a third stage. Though they seem to need to refuel it in orbit because it structurally is not designed to launch fully fueled. So that's a little bit of a downer. SpaceX desperately needs a way to get payloads over to the moon that does not involve sending the entirety of Starship over there. And of course, SpaceX doesn't want to do hydrolocks. Fine, a Methalock stage that can handle this. Anything. Of course, they have to make a Starship that has a big bay door that can open so that such a payload could get out. So we've got a lot of steps to take here. But, you know, it can't be that every single mission to the moon is going to take 10 launches. Think about it this way. Yeah, Starship can deliver 100 tons to... That's optimistic. I mean, let's say that Starship can deliver 100 tons to the surface of the moon. Great. And it takes, let's just say 10 launches to do that. But Starship with a dedicated upper stage could easily, on a single launch, get 20 tons over to the moon and land it. Because, I mean, if it has a 100-ton payload capacity to low Earth orbit, it could probably get about 20 tons to the surface of the moon. It depends exactly what you're using. I'm always thinking of hydrolox, though. So it's probably the hydrolox numbers, not methalox numbers. But in that case, 10 launches of Starship could get 200 tons to the surface of the moon. Or even if it's 15 tons per launch, 150 tons to the surface of the moon. So you don't need to send everything all in one lump. It's actually potentially more efficient to just have Starship, which is optimized for low Earth orbit, to stay in low Earth orbit and have a third stage that separately goes to the moon. But anyway, this is why SLS is a good rocket. I mean, on the eve of Artemis 2 launching, in defense of SLS, this is why SLS is a good rocket, because it is, at least with the EUS, meant for as doing, if only, you know, any NASA administrator would twist some arms and get the pricing down on these things, it could be useful. But apparently nobody wants to deal with the contractors to actually get them to make these things at a proper price. So we're in the bind that we have. So anyway, that's SLS as Falcon 9 and the implications thereof, and we'll leave it here. So with that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.